Okay, thank you very much for that introduction, Andrea. And it's so wonderful to be here with all of you. Um, I love teaching about seed saving, and I'm glad so many people are interested in this wonderful topic. So let's get right started with why save seeds. Okay, one reason is you can adapt local varieties. So if you have seeds from a plant that grew well in your yard, then that plant is obviously adapted to your environment. For example, here in Richmond, we have cool summers that tomatoes, they don't do so well with that. So cool tolerant tomatoes grow well here. And if your neighbor or you grew it and save the seeds, then you will have seeds that do well here in Richmond. So it also leads to selection of seeds that are adapted to our changing climate. So preserving plant diversity, this is really important, and I will talk more about that on the next slide. Create community. So gardening together is a great way to create community and connect us to the earth. If we save our seeds, we can share the bounty and even plant our gardens together with our neighbors. We can also build resilience in our community by saving our own seeds and not having to rely on seed companies. So it creates food security. For example, in the pandemic, I don't know if you heard, one of the supply issues in the pandemic was seeds. There was a lot of seeds not available. So seed libraries and sharing among ourselves can help deal with that. Thriftiness, so not wasting such a precious resource as a seed is a wonderful thing. And for seed libraries, it makes us self-sustaining. Full circle gardening, it's great to eat a tomato that you planted from a seed that you saved last year, and it really connects you to the seasons and to your own environment. And history and culture. So ever since humans started agriculture 12,000 years ago, we've saved seeds. That essential skill has been lost in the last 2 generations. We've outsourced it. So it connects us to the earth and our community by engaging in this 12,000 year old tradition. And besides, saving seeds is fun. This is a bit of an eye chart, but what it's showing on the top is the seed varieties that were commercially available in 1903, and then below how many were available 80 years later. So it was 408 tomatoes back in 1903 and 79 80 years later, and that trend has continued. So why, you can see that holds true with all these vegetables types on this chart, your lettuce, your radishes, your peas, everything. So why is that? So why are 97% of vegetable varieties gone in the last 100 years? So what happens is big seed companies come in and they buy up smaller seed companies that have a lot of different variety of seeds. But the big seed companies discard seed varieties they're not interested in. So for instance, a delicious but thin-skinned tomato, which doesn't store well or keep well or ship well, they'll just throw it away and then it won't be commercially available anymore. So this has happened over and over with all kinds of seeds. And so we in the seed saving community can get seeds through libraries or groups working to preserve seeds, and then we can grow them out and save them once we know how, which you all will at the end of this talk. So, but here's another thing to consider. If we wanted to find a more heat and drought tolerant type of lettuce, do you think we'd have a better chance with the 497 varieties that used to be available or the current 36? So this is why it's really important for us to learn how to save our own seeds. One of many reasons. So seed saving, how to know. We need to know how to grow out our plants so they produce seeds. We need to know how to avoid cross-pollination, and we'll be talking a lot about that. And we need to know how to harvest and store our seeds. So pollination. So let me tell you a story about saving seeds. So let's say that once, one year you grew this wonderful pumpkin. It was so great. It was beautiful, and you carved some of them up for Halloween, and then you saved one for Thanksgiving and made a great pumpkin pie with it. So you say to yourself, I'm going to save these seeds and plant them next year because, I want to grow this every year. This is wonderful. So you grow the seeds the next year and the pumpkins start forming and they look a little funny. They kind of have like a stripe down them and they're not really the round shape that the other pumpkin was. So what happened? So what happened was, unbeknownst to you, a bee came from your neighbor's garden that was growing a delicata squash, and the pollen pollinated your pumpkin that you saved the seeds from with this pollen from the delicata squash. And so you got a hybrid, okay? That's what can happen if you don't know how plants pollinate. So let's talk more about how that happens. So there are two kinds of flowers. There's a perfect flower, for example, the one picture on the left, a tomato flower. And that's one that has the male and female parts in the same flower. So the pollen from the male part of the flower can easily get into the female part of the flower. And then there are imperfect flowers like the one on the right, which is a squash flower. You can see that there's the flower on the right. That's a squash flower, which is a female flower. It's showing that it's a female flower because you can see the fruit right below it. And you can also see at the inside of that flower is like bowl shaped, okay? On the right of that right picture is a male flower that has not come out yet. So it's not blossomed yet. But you can see that there's no fruit at the bottom of that. So that's how you know it's a male flower. And also inside the flower, it's a spike shape. It's a different shape. And these are called imperfect flowers, meaning they're not complete like the perfect flowers. Okay, how to avoid cross-pollination? Why is this important? If you understand how a flower gets pollinated, you understand the risk that the plant can become cross-pollinated. So some plants have a tendency to self-pollinate, so you don't have to worry about weird things happening in the next generation, like happened with that pumpkin. They tend to come what's called true to type, meaning they'll look like the parent. So some pollination vocabulary, there's self-pollination, where a single flower pollinates itself, often before it opens. And then there's cross-pollination, where the pollen is exchanged between flowers from the same or different plants. And pollen from a different variety of the same species can produce a hybrid. Pollination methods. So there are perfect flowers that are self-pollinated. They're also called inbreeders. There are enclosed flowers, which almost always self-pollinate. But some perfect flowers are self-incompatible, and they need insects to pollinate them. It's a way to increase genetic diversity, so they don't let themselves pollinate themselves. So they need insects. And then you have your outbreeders or crossbreeders, the imperfect flowers like the squash. They're insect pollinated, they're honey or native bees or bumblebees or moths, butterflies, wasps, flies, etc. And some are wind pollinated. So the pollen just flies around in the wind and pollinates the female part. So a little bit of taxonomy from your high school biology on the chance that that's been more than a few years ago for you, like it is for me. There's family, genus, species, and variety. Okay, what we need to know is that plants can cross and produce viable offspring at the species level. So if they're the same species, they can produce viable offspring. So varieties of the same species will crossbreed. So there are different varieties of carrots. You know how carrots come in different colors. So they could, if they were in the same area and flowering together, they could produce a hybrid. So the family of carrots is Umbellifers. It has those umbrella type seeds, Daucus carota and sativa. So species and varieties. The plant species, interbreeding produces fertile offspring, for instance, tomatoes. And plant varieties have a distinct appearance that hybridizes freely with other varieties. So for instance, Brandywine, Stupese, San Francisco Fog. Just on this pictures, you can see the variety of different varieties of tomatoes. There's green ones, there's orange ones, there's red ones, there's small ones, there's big ones. So there's a lot of different tomatoes, and but they're all in the same species, so they can interbreed. So here's a picture of cross-pollination happening. So the same species and variety will get true to type. On the left, you have a bee that goes from one yellow sunflower of the same species to another yellow sunflower and pollinates it, and produces, those seeds will look like the parent. But on the right, that's a different variety. It has that orange center, okay? A bee goes from that to the other yellow only one, and that's going to hybridize, and you'll get unpredictable results. Let's talk a little about heirlooms and hybrids. I'm sure you've heard of heirlooms. Heirloom seeds come from what's called open pollinated. That means pollinated by natural means, wind, insects, etc. And they tend to be more genetically diverse because of that. Plants, and they're plants that pass on similar characteristics, traits from the parent to the child plant. So not a hybrid or GMO. There's no concrete definition that every gardener uses to define heirloom plants. One I like is history of being passed down within a family or community, similar to the generational sharing of heirloom jewelry and furniture. And more simply, one that has a face, a place, and a story. So here's a story. The face here on this slide is Bill McDormand, and he is a master seed saver. He runs schools. He goes all around the world trying to save heirloom seeds. He's involved with a group called the Seed Savers Exchange. The place is in the middle, that's Siberia in Russia. And the story is about this type of tomato called Sasha's Altai. So one time, Bill McDormand was in Siberia at a seed conference. This was after the Soviet Union kind of opened up in the 90s. And a lot of seed saving activity was going on in Siberia. We didn't really know about it. So he was very excited to go to this conference. And a couple of days before the conference ended, this little guy came up to him and said to him through a translator, "Would you like some tomato seeds from the best tomato in the world?" And Bill said, "Yeah, sure." And so the little guy turns around and walks into the mountains. And Bill looks at his translator and says, "What just happened?" And the translator says, "Oh, that's Sasha. He lives a day's walk up into the mountains. So in order for him to get back here before you leave, he's going to have to start walking now." So sure enough, right before Bill leaves, Sasha comes up, this little packet that he's made of seeds of these tomatoes called Sasha's Altai. And they are indeed delicious. I've grown them because a seed that grows, a tomato that grows in Siberia could deal with cool summers. They also grow well in the cool summers of Richmond. So hybrids. Hybrids can be accidental or intentional. Many seeds you buy are intentionally hybridized to produce certain results like bigger, disease resistant, etc. And with hybrids, the first and second generation, the first generation produces well, but the genetics aren't stable. So the next generation produces any number of genetic variations. They don't breed true to type. You don't know what you're going to get in successive generations. And sometimes, as in corn, the vigor is also reduced in the second generation from hybrids. So when you buy seeds, it might say something like F1, it means filia 1, first offspring. Again, hybrids don't breed true to type. So don't save hybrids unless you feel adventurous or don't care. But do label your experiment if you do choose to save a hybrid or something that may have hybridized, and especially if you're going to share seeds with someone. seed saving levels. So some plant families are easier to save seeds without getting cross-pollinated than others. So there are super easy ones that don't readily cross-pollinate or only need short distances isolated from another variety in order to come true to type. And then there are easy families that require larger populations to ensure plant vigor, or they may be biennial, meaning they only produce seeds every other year, or require a wintering period. So super easy families and easy plant families. Super easy ones are the legumes, which beans and peas, your sunflower family, which includes lettuce. Lettuce is in the sunflower family. And easy, but not as easy, are the nightshade family, which is your tomatoes, peppers, potatoes, and eggplants. More difficult plant families, attention required. They need to be hand pollinated or caged to ensure purity. Your squash, pumpkins, melons, peppers, eggplants, corn, beets, and chard. The Brassica family, which are your cabbage, kale, broccoli, etc. And the Umbelliferi family, the fennel, parsley, and carrots. So seed saving guidelines. So it's important to keep good garden records. Record information about the seeds that you save for yourself and others if you share your seeds. I'll talk more about that in the next slide. Do save from healthy, true to type plants. And plan, you can, once you know which seeds will cross, which plants will cross, you can plan your garden to reduce cross-pollination. So you could plant just one variety, so you don't have to worry about them cross-pollinating as much. There's a thing called isolation distance, meaning how far apart the plants need to be from a different variety they could cross with to ensure seed purity. Now, that's not always possible in home gardens. So some of them are like 400 feet, half a mile. So we can't always achieve that in our home gardens. So you can do things like planting on different sides of your house if you have two different planting areas, or you can have a friend plant one variety and you plant the other and you're far enough away from each other, so it's not a problem. So here's some information that's good to record when you're saving your seeds. This is an envelope from the Richmond Grove Seed Lending Library. So the things that you might want to record is the common name, tomato, for instance, the scientific name, if you know it, the variety, Brandywine, the seed source would be you, who grew it, the location of the harvest, like grew it in Richmond or wherever, the year. It's important so that you know how old the seeds are. And notes, there's a number of things we could record on the notes. We'll talk about that in a minute. And how difficult the seeds are to save. So you know if it's an easy family and not likely to have crossed, or difficult. So an example of the notes you might want to put on there is it determinate or indeterminate, meaning is it a bush type or vining type, the color, size, shape, how you use it, disease resistance, is it suitable for containers, early, mid, or late season, length of harvest. Also, if you know information about the planting instructions that you would get in a normal seed envelope, like how deep to plant it, how far apart, etc. So I talked a little bit about isolation distance, how far apart plants of the same species that could cross need to be from each other. And you can also isolate by time. So if you plant a crop that's flowering in July, you can plant another variety that's not flowering until September. If the pollen isn't in your garden at the same time, you don't need to worry about crossing. Or you can plant one variety, and you could hand or pollinate or cage or bag. And these are advanced techniques that we will be talking about a little bit later. But I do encourage you to start with the easier plant families when your seed saving adventures start. So minimum isolation distance depends. on the terrain and the natural barriers. So as mentioned before, you could work with your neighbor and have them plant, plant something, and you plant a different variety and you're far enough apart that way. Your house could be in the middle. You could have an adjacent crop, like a large stand of sunflowers, which will distract the insects with both the flowers and the height of the plants. And if it's a wind pollinated crop, you need to think about the prevailing winds. So collect seeds from your best specimens. So remove rogue plants. Like if a plant looks really odd and you want to save seeds in that area, you might just take out that plant so that that pollen doesn't get into your seed stock, preferably before they flower. Don't collect seeds from diseased plants or misshapen fruit. Sometimes you have to sacrifice eating the plant to get the seeds too, so realize that. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different families of plants, because different plants within a family usually have similar seed-saving strategies. So if you know one family, you'll have an idea how they pollinate. Now, there's going to be a lot of information. We're going to have a handout we're going to send you that will summarize a lot of this information, plus some resources as well. So the sunflower family has perfect flowers. It's self or insect pollinated. The chance of cross-pollination is low, especially with lettuce, which is in the sunflower family. So strategies to reduce cross-pollination with sunflowers: you can plant one variety. You do need multiple sunflowers to get the best seeds, because sunflowers are one of those self-incompatible plants, so they don't pollinate themselves. So multiple sunflowers to get the best seed set, and you can be the bee, meaning you can rub your hand over one sunflower on one plant and then go over to the other and rub your hands. So you can act like the bee to help pollinate the sunflowers. Let the seeds dry on the plant. That's the general rule of thumb for saving seeds. And good luck keeping them away from the squirrels and birds when they're ready. There's different varieties of lettuce: your butterhead, loose leaf, romaine, and crisphead. Again, it's actually part of the sunflower family, and it's the easiest seed to start saving with. Very low possibility of crossing. So how you save seeds is, first, you let your lettuce, what they say, bolt. Let it grow a seed stalk and flower. On the right, you can see there's a lettuce plant that has bolted and gone to seed. When half the flowers are fluffy, cut the stalk and dry further in a paper bag. So this is my garden, and I've let more than 50% go, because what happens if the seeds start dropping. Okay, so if you want all your seeds, cut them down and they'll continue to ripen inside the paper bag. Okay, but in my garden, I let some seeds self-sow. I'm a rather lazy gardener for some things. So arugula, mustard, nasturtiums, cress, calendula, I just let them drop the seeds where they are in place. And of course, you often have to thin your plants because they, tend to seed quite densely when you just let that happen. And you can just weed them out. So back to the list, you put it in a big brown paper bag. And when most of the flowers are fluffy, you can separate the seeds. The seeds are below those white puffs, and there's many, many seeds in one flower. And again, don't plant immediately. It needs a resting period of 9 months or so. So moving on to the pea and bean family. To avoid cross-pollination, you can plant one variety. The chance of cross-pollination is generally low. The isolation distance for peas, 50 feet, beans, 100 feet. So to dry, the bean seeds are big, so make sure that they are dry. You want to allow them to dry in the pods before collecting and storing. And when I say dry, I mean really dry, so that the pod would snap if you broke it. So if you feel the pod and it feels a little moist and bends instead of snapping, leave it on there until it's dry. And another way to know how it's dry is you can, they will shatter when hit with a hammer. So I let them dry, then you take the beans out of the pods and I let them dry some more on the counter. And then if you're not sure if they're really dry, they should be kind of light because there should be no moisture in them at all. And if you're not sure, try hitting it with a hammer and it should shatter. That's how dry it needs to be. And then it's a good idea to freeze beans for at least a week to kill the weevils. Okay, if you do freeze your beans, you want to make sure to spread them out on a paper towel or absorbent cloth to defrost them and let them come up to room temperature because you don't want the moisture to form on the beans after that. Or you could let them come up to room temperature in the jar before opening it. Peas, different kinds. The sugar snap peas, where you eat both the peas and the pods, the snow peas, where you eat the slender pods, and the shelling beans, where you eat the peas only. There's sweet peas, which are a different species altogether, are fragrant, have fragrant flowers, but they're poisonous. Some pea selection traits might be the productivity. Is it a heavy bearer, long season? Is it early bearer or late? Taste, disease resistant? Is it drought tolerant? Again, always save your seeds from the healthiest, true to type plants. So here with the peas, you could pick some pods are bigger than others, and the peas are bigger than others. So pick your bigger ones to save your seeds. So different bean species. So there are different species of beans, and as we know, plants can cross at the species level. So if you plant a common bean, and you have fava beans right next to it, they won't cross because they're different species. Here's a chart that shows you in the common bean species are the black beans, borlati, shell, and string beans. So if you had black beans planted next to string beans, they could cross. But if you had a black bean next to a scarlet runner bean, you wouldn't have to worry. Okay. So the favas and runner beans have bigger flowers, and therefore there's a higher chance of cross-pollination. So plant only one variety of those or separate them by 100 feet if possible. So when I was first starting to garden, I didn't know about seed saving really and all of this cross-pollination stuff. So I had some beautiful Negretta fava beans, this really dark black ebony seed. And I planted a bunch of them, but I planted a bunch of the other kind of green fava beans next to them. So the next generation of seeds, what I got was kind of a dark brown. It definitely wasn't black, a brown. It was a combination of the green and the black seeds. So we'll go to a different plant family now, the nightshade family. That's your tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplants. They have perfect flowers. They are self or insect pollinated. The chance of cross-pollination is low, but it is higher in peppers. Potatoes in this family are actually propagated from the potato eyes, and they form new leaves and stems. And fun fact, the leaves in this family are poisonous, so don't eat the eyes of your potatoes. So strategies for tomatoes are to plant one variety, separate varieties by 10 feet. 10 feet, that's not a lot, okay? That's doable in a lot of gardens. Or plant the flowering crop in between the varieties if you can't manage the 10 feet. Now, saving the seeds of tomato requires some extra steps that is not required by other types of seeds. So here's what you have to do. You have to squeeze the seeds out of the tomato, okay, the inner part, and the seeds in the pulp. And, if it's not a real juicy tomato and doesn't have much liquid, you can add a little bit of water. Distilled or filtered water is best, just a little bit. And then you let them mold. You put them on your counter, and in a few days, it'll start to form some mold. And that serves two purposes. It dissolves that little gel pack around the seed, which you need to do in order to be able to dry your seeds. And it also supplies some disease resistance, kind of like penicillin. So after the mold has formed, you rinse your tomatoes, put some more water, rinse them a number of times. You can hardly see in that picture number 3, there's one floating seed. It's a floater. So you want to discard any floaters because they're not viable seeds. Then you want to strain, strain the water out once you've rinsed it, and then dry it and label. I like to use a cartons to dry them because they're nice and absorbent, but you can use a paper plate or a regular plate with a paper towel on it. Make sure they're totally dry before you store them. So peppers, separate varieties of the same species by 400 feet, or plant only one variety, or bag them. I'll tell you what that is in a moment. So these two peppers will cross, the bell pepper and the jalapeno pepper. They can cross. I think I read somewhere that the hot gene is dominant. So that would be an interesting mix if you grew a bell pepper. Here's another way to see if it's hybridized, and this has happened to me actually. I taste the pepper the next year and it's like, this is kind of hot. It's not really supposed to be a hot pepper. And so that can be an unpleasant surprise. So peppers, you can bag them. So what that means is you find a flower that hasn't opened yet and you put a little tiny bag on it, a little tiny bag that is available at seed companies. Southern Exposure Seed Exchange has them because the flowers are pretty small. So you put a bag on it, you mark the stem with a ribbon so that you know you're going to collect the seeds from that pepper. And you let the bag stay on until the flower drops off and the fruit is formed. Okay. So what that is doing is, since it's a perfect flower, it can pollinate itself, but you don't want insects to come and, mix some pollen on you. So you're letting it pollinate itself with the bag. Okay. Processing pepper seeds, you remove the cores, scrape the seeds off the cores, rinse and dry. Use gloves with hot peppers, but you probably already know that from cooking with hot peppers. So now we're getting into the more difficult families, the Umbelliferae. It's also called Apiaceae, but things like your dill, carrots, fennel, also Queen Anne's lace, parsley, coriander, those are all in this family. And look at those flowers. There's a million of them, and insects love them. Nice little landing platforms for them. So you need bagging or caging, which I'll explain in a moment, in order to ensure purity in this family, and it's very difficult to save. So cucurbits, that's your squash, pumpkins, cucumbers, melons, isolation distance 1/2 mile. Yeah. If you hand pollinate, you don't have to do that isolation distance. That's good, right? So here's some that are in the same species that will cross-pollinate each other. The cucurbit pepo. Most pumpkins are in that. Acorn squash, spaghetti squash, delicata squash, summer squash, zucchini. Obviously, these are very different in appearance, but they're the same species, so they can cross-pollinate each other. There are some other squash like the butternut and Hubbard, which are in different species. So you don't have to worry about them cross-pollinating with any of these cucurbit pepos. So hand pollinating squash. It's good to start practicing hand pollination with squash because they have bigger flowers and it's easier to do. So the female part only has half the genetics and it needs the male to pollen from the male in order to mature. So I don't know if you've noticed if you grow squash that sometimes you get a lot of baby squashes, but they don't really mature and then they just drop off. That could be because of pollination. It didn't get pollinated, so then it won't grow into a full-grown squash. So it's a good idea to hand pollinate your squash, even if you're not saving the seeds. You'll get more mature squash. And I always hand pollinate my squash, even though I literally have a beehive 10 feet from where I'm growing my squash. So here's another bee-to-bee situation. Here's what you do. You go out at night and you find a female flower that's about to open and you tape it closed like you see in the picture there on the left. The next morning, you open it and you rub pollen from the male flower at the top of the slide. You can see the male flower on the left, which says a straight stem, no fruit behind it. So you can see that it's a male flower and it has a spike inside. That's where the pollen is. The female flower has a mini fruit at the base and it has like a bowl shaped inside. So you need to find a male flower. Hopefully you'll have one at the same time that your female flower is about to open. And you rub the pollen from the male flower onto that bowl shape in the middle of the female flower. Okay, you can do that. You can tear the male flower off and take the petals off and just rub it on, or you can use a little paintbrush or a Q-tip in order to transfer the pollen from the male to the female. Then you close up the female flower again and make sure you mark the stem so that you know that this is the one you're going to collect the seeds from, right? And here's another sacrifice situation. Can't eat this squash, okay, if you want to collect the seeds. You need to let the squash go way, way past ripe. Like, those giant zucchinis you get, and they turn, yellow and brown and just really, kind of hard. Keep it on the vine until it's way, way past ripe. So here's another family called the Brassicas. This is your cabbages, etc. So they have perfect flowers, but they require insect pollination because many of them are self-incompatible. So caging is a technique that allows two different flowering varieties to be pollinated by insects without being cross-pollinated. You have to have a cage of wood, wire, or plastic frames that are covered with a fine screen and put them around the plants. And then insects have to be introduced if they're not already in there because they do need insects to pollinate them. So saving brassicas and having them come true to type is really best left to commercial seed companies. But that being said, I save brassica seeds. I have a number of different brassicas in my garden and I don't cage them. So I just assume that they've crossed. I know that I don't know what I'm going to get. Here in Richmond, a friend of mine has developed a really nice cross between a lacinato kale and a purple tree collard. So it has curly-ish leaves of the kale and it has the rangy tree structure of the collard and some purple in it, not as purple as the tree collard. So feel free to experiment. And I also let my brassicas self-sow too. So minimum population is 20 plants for the genetic diversity, if you're a seed company. And can you name the 7 different plants in the Brassica oleracea family? Here they are. All of these can cross with each other. Kale, collard, cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, and kohlrabi. So another family, the corn family, this is really, really very difficult to save. It's in the grass family. It's wind pollinated, isolation distance suggested 1/2 mile plus, minimum population 100. Okay, really not manageable in most family home gardens. So, but it's kind of interesting to the top tassel is where the pollen in. That's the male flower. So this is an imperfect flower. And then the cob is actually the female flower. And the silks need to get the pollen from the male onto the silks because each of those silks goes to a kernel of corn. And I'm sure you bought corn or grown corn, maybe that some of the kernels are missing. That means that it didn't get pollinated. So in corn, pollen of a given plant rarely fertilizes the silks of the same plant. So under field conditions, 97% or more of the kernels produced by each plant are pollinated by other plants in the field. And that ensures genetic diversity for the corn. So what are the best plants for beginner seed savers? Peas, beans, lettuce, tomatoes, and wheat, if you're growing that. All are extremely self-pollinating and usually come true to type with little effort. Squash and other cucurbits, relatively easy, but you must hand pollinate to prevent insects from cross-pollinating. And remember, now that you know a bit about avoiding cross-pollination. Feel free to experiment, just document the results. So seed storage protocol and processing. So when you store your seeds, keep the temperature and relative humidity less than 100. So if it's 60 degrees, you want the humidity less than 40 degrees, okay? Have a dark, dry, cool, and protected from pests where you store them once they're all dried. And how long will seeds last? Under ideal conditions, seeds will last 1 to 5 years, but that differs depending on the seed. The general rule of thumb is that the bigger the seed is, the longer it will last. So go ahead and plant old seeds if you have them. Just plant more than you would need, assuming that the germination rate will be reduced because they're old. Seed saving protocol: save seeds from healthy plants. Even if a disease doesn't get passed on through the seed, you can select for disease resistance by only saving from healthy, strong plants. Save the number of plants to ensure genetic diversity. Don't always have to follow this rule in a home garden, but it's good if you can. And there are charts online that tell you what the number of plants you should have to ensure genetic diversity in the different families. Isolate plants that cross-pollinate or bag or hand pollinate. Good labeling, record as much as you possibly can. And if you gather seeds that don't follow steps 1, 2, or 3, add that information to the label. And make sure that your seeds are dry and clean. Seed processing, there are different techniques depending on the seed size, the type of shaft and pods, etc. We've talked about processing while talking about the different plant families. Strainers and screens can be helpful in separating the seed from the shaft sometimes. And a little review of terms. Isolation, time, you can isolate by time or by distance, how far away the same species needs to be from each other, or have them flower at different times. Minimum population, that's, again, in a home garden, you can't always achieve the ideal, but it's good if you can. Traits and characteristics, these are like things like early bearer, disease resistant, etc. Roguing out, that means taking out the plants that look strange, that you don't want their genetics to get into your seeds. And true to type mean not hybrid, not cross-pollinated, looks like the parent. Okay. So some resources, and this will be on your handout, these books and resources. Seed to Seed by Susan Ashworth is a good book. Bill McDorman, who I talked about earlier with the Sasha's Altai seed, has written a book, Basic Seed Saving. And there's a website called Seed Saving Alliance that has free online classes, okay, and other resources for seed saving. Additional resources. There are public libraries where seed libraries are set up and where the community can borrow seeds. Now, what does it mean to borrow seeds? So you get a seed free from the library and you grow that, you learn about seed saving, you grow that out, produce seeds, and return the next generation of seeds to the library. And then over time, you'll get locally adapted seeds and be self-sufficient as well. The Richmond Library, Richmond Grow Seeds is the name of the library, the seed library there. We offer classes in seed saving and gardening. And in fact, Richmond Grows is a partner of Contra Costa Master Gardeners and actually developed this class. So a version of this class is online in their, on their website. They also have resources to help other communities set up seed libraries. So all of their processes and all their classes and all their information about how to set up a seed library is available, and it's open source and available to anyone who goes to the website. So we also kept the library going during the pandemic because of course the library was closed, but set up 13 little seed libraries that, like the little book libraries you see in people's yards. So made seed libraries and gave away thousands of seed packets. And the pandemic did cause seed shortages. So it was great for a community to still have access to seeds, because gardening became very popular during the pandemic as well. So that website is richmondgrowseeds.org. It's at the Richmond Library. There's a couple of seed libraries in El Cerrito too. There's one at the El Cerrito Public Library and at the El Cerrito Recycling Center. There's one at the Kensington Public Library and the Pinole Public Library as well. And many, many others throughout the country.